Please help me welcome Maggie Stuckey.
Fred Rogers dedicated his life to serving children. Through writing, producing, and hosting Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, he could take any difficult situation and respond with an easy-to-understand and affirming life lesson. Mr. Rogers raised generations of children, nurturing and inspiring us at every moment. At a time when neighborhoods were changing, his neighborhood was a calm, safe place where children could learn about themselves, others, and the world around them. Today's world is complicated and scary. We are confronted with headlines about death and destruction, shootings and shutdowns, walls and wars. It's easy to want to get home and shut the door, to disconnect, to trust less. Instead, I want to challenge you to be vulnerable, to lean into relationships with those around you, to build community right where you are. Mr. Rogers taught us lessons that can help us be great daughters, spouses, friends, and yes, neighbors. To define a neighbor as someone who lives next door is limiting. It's so much more than that. Someone you live near, a colleague or a friend, someone who needs your help or who could help you. A neighbor is more than just a similar address, and it's all about trust. So let's talk about trust. Data from local nonprofit Civic Nebraska tells us that Nebraskans in general trust one another, and trust is critical because it predicates positive action. If an individual trusts those around them, they're more likely to be engaged in their neighborhood. But how do you build trust? Pop culture gives us countless examples of trusting neighbor relationships, especially in sitcoms. You know what I'm talking about, the neighbor who enters without knocking, ready with the catchy tagline, the one who schemes, the one who's there for the life lesson. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we're also told that neighbors are scary. They cannot be trusted. They're up to no good. This is a combination of Lifetime movies, books, games, and our Friday nights watching Dateline. Don't watch alone. What it means to be a neighbor has certainly changed over the years, and expectations vary greatly based on where, when, and how you live. But the lessons Mr. Rogers taught us are still relevant today and can rise above those differences. The first lesson, no one thing defines a person. Each neighbor you meet is a combination of the messy and the blessings. And no one thing, whether on the surface or below the surface, defines them. Instead of fixating on the one thing that you know, celebrate the many things. In 1982, 10-year-old Jeff Erlinger appeared on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. They talked about his spinal cord injury, his upcoming surgery, and his thoughts about being in a wheelchair. And together they sang one of the show's most popular songs, It's You I Like, because no one thing defines a person. The second lesson, we have an obligation to help one another. In our interconnected world, we know more and more about the struggles faced by those around us. What can we do today to help lighten the load? Choosing to live in community means choosing to be available and willing to help. Mr. Rogers loved the story of the 100-yard dash at the 1976 Spokane Special Olympics. A young athlete fell at the start of the race. Every other runner stopped and went to his aid. And together they linked arms and crossed the finish line together. They helped one another. The third lesson, understanding that everyone is fighting a tough battle, so be kind to all. It's cliche, but can you point to a moment when it's changed your behavior? In every interaction, step back and start from a place of caring. You don't know their battle. As divorce became more and more common, Mr. Rogers recognized the impact it was having on his television neighbors. In a series of episodes, he reminded children that divorce was never their fault, that their parents would always love them. Mr. Rogers chose love. And the fourth lesson, love always wins. Love, that powerful and vulnerable moment when you are seen, known, and understood by those around you. When we start from a place of love, there's nothing we cannot do. But remember, you can only love others as much as you love yourself. In 1969, Mr. Rogers entered the battleground of racial segregation. Like lunch counters and public buses, swimming pools had become a point of protest. Mr. Rogers responded by inviting Officer Clemens to join him in the wading pool on a hot summer afternoon. Love wins. So let's practice. Take a moment, think about a neighbor, someone you interact with on a regular basis. Maybe it's the family next door with the new baby, the woman upstairs with the super cute dog. For me, Scooter's barista. So, think about the 4 lessons we talked about today. No one thing defines them. Can you give them that grace? Do they have needs you could fulfill right now? Do you show kindness in your interactions with them? Have you conveyed to them that you accept them exactly as they are? Being a great neighbor doesn't take a degree or a grand gesture. It doesn't take a shared fence. It certainly doesn't take money. But it does take vulnerability, empathy, and trust. What would Lincoln be like if we were kind to one another, even when we didn't need to be? If we went out of our way to help one another, even when there wasn't a reason? I believe we can do it. Won't you be my neighbor?